Hey guys, welcome to the show. We're going to continue the interview with Alton Takeyasu, who is a major designer on the Centurions. He created the bad guys, Dog Terror, Hacker, and the drones, and he also designed Max Ray's gear and some of Jake Rockwell's gear. And he started at Kenner, and then he moved on to Mattel, where he's been a major force on the Hot Wheels brand. And this is part 2 of our interview. Hope you enjoy. Alton, just to chime in on these prototype questions again, I know and we should be mindful that you weren't with the project for its whole run because you were focusing on Ghostbusters and licensed IP based toys. But do you remember beyond the one that we mentioned, the skies, the wall walker concept, any gimmicks or any mechanisms? Because you said that mechanisms were like a focus. People wanted to get mechanisms or gimmicks into toys. Do you remember any that were considered for the Centurions? I'm just mentioning this because we have seen a prototype that's a vacuum metallic, Max figure with the whole body metallic. Do you remember this or any other attempts that were not incorporated into the toy line?
Well, that might have been done after our department, and for toy fairs and for catalogs, I'm sure they needed to keep refreshing the line for the buyers and holding some things out there for them. So I could see going VOM on some characters or doing exclusive would have, helped the line go on. Yeah, it was kind of a pattern in the toy industry. It's like you go glow in the dark, you go VOM. You've already amortized your tooling. You're trying to amortize the tooling, so you try to, do different finishes.
And of course, with Rex Charger, you already had the glow in the dark figure taken care of.
Yeah, they jumped the shark already.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
I know.
Do you remember whether a Skyvault playset or any non-weapon systems or non-figure accessories were planned?
Not in my team, because I think the whole idea is that we had a line that didn't require playsets or large hunks of plastic.
Well, can I tell you what I know about a planned Skyvault playset then? Okay, Ted Peterson, once again, the story editor of the Centurions cartoon, he sent me the writer's guide and a bunch of other stuff. And one of the things he sent me was some paperwork relating to a potential Skyvault playset, which would have had Crystal Kane's voice saying a bunch of individual words and phrases that would have combined together to make complete sentences, which I think would have been a very exciting concept. And it's one that Kenner used later on Jurassic Park and one that Hasbro used later on its 12-inch talking Duke figure from G.I. Joe.
Yep. I don't remember working on that, but I could see them doing stuff that aligned more with the animation. Mm-hmm. We didn't look at playsets as much. Like, I did send you the image of the triple vehicle. I have layouts and renderings of it where it's this mega vehicle that all three combine into one big vehicle.
Right, I remember.
So it's land, sea, and air in one big vehicle.
I remember that one, but that was an early concept, so that was abandoned during the design process?
Because we were trying to avoid doing big playsets. And that we thought that a big Halo item would be the mega vehicle rather than a playset.
Was that just an expectation of, parent budgets, and that's why you didn't want to go too big?
Or I think it's more the philosophy of the line that they didn't need a place to hang out.
Oh, I see. And Alton, so basically we kind of touched on this question before, but and you mentioned that the toy line was I wouldn't say destined to be short-lived, but since it was not borrowing an IP, but it's an original project, maybe Kenner didn't give enough attention to it or priority, or maybe it was a built-in thing that these toy lines came and went, but what do you think caused, in your opinion, the short lifespan of the Centurions?
There also been Ruby Spears in their scheduling too, in their budgets. So it might have been a combination of both, and maybe the market itself.
Yeah, the market is an important factor here because there is just so much competition in action figures and cartoons based on action figures in the 80s, and particularly in 1986. There were like 20 other cartoons all competing for the same demographic, and someone had to lose. And also another thing that people speculate about is that the Centurions toys were pretty expensive. They cost around $10 just for a figure, whereas you could buy three GI Joes for that same price and have a little change left over.
Right. That's why Max Steel that I worked on at Mattel was an expensive figure, about foot tall. Sold very well in Latin America, Mexico. It did have different competition. It had different programming for it. The market was different. Same thing with Centurions. I think it did well in Mexico and UK. There's a lot of UK fans. So I think their market was different.
Well, I just wish that the toy line kept going internationally then.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes they do. There's a lot of toy lines that it's like jazz music. Sometimes it does better in another country.
This is just a footnote. I kind of feel embarrassed to waste your time with such a question, but it's just, you're such an expert on toys, of course. Is there a specific reason why the Centurions, of course, they were wearing like these exo frames, but why, the whole figure is plastic, which I prefer, and later on, like Max Steel and similar like Action Man and these other toy lines had like actual fabric on the figure as opposed to, the entire outfit molded? Because to me, it felt like a Barbie doll. It didn't attract me as GI Joe or the Centurions did.
Right, and it was more of a doll. I think the doll concept worked better in those other non-U.S. markets, obviously.
So it was for a specific niche market or a specific market where like these semi Barbie doll or Ken figure action figures work better.
Yeah, possibly.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, and if you look at Centurions, they have to be molded in their native color because they have so many friction and snap points. So it doesn't really allow you to do much flesh tones anywhere because the flesh would have to be painted on, which always looks terrible. So that's why you don't see any skin except their heads.
Oh, that's interesting.
Even their hands would have had separate pieces of flesh.
Yeah, Alton, this leads me into a question about the appearances of the Centurions. Now, I've had confirmed to me that Max Ray with his dark hair and mustache was indeed based on Tom Selleck. I remember being told that Jake Rockwell was based on Harrison Ford, more or less. I'm just wondering how many other Kenner-originated characters had appearances that were based on either celebrities or company employees, as Hasbro sometimes did with G.I. Joe.
Yeah, we didn't do as much as Hasbro did for G.I. Joe, but I think we were usually looking at what's happening in the world. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Tom Selleck and Harrison Ford were very popular actors at that time, and we like the archetypes, and they're rugged and masculine, but they're not like too pretty or doll-like. So obviously, when you're doing a larger doll, you don't want it to look like Ken. You want it to look, different, not a doll.
Right.
And so, also, if you give a target, say, kind of make it like Tom Selleck, at least they can aim for that, rather than just making an arbitrary guy's head.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
I think you're always trying to, come up with a inspiration image or target, so that way it ensures that you've got at least some personality in it, that it looks like somebody.
Yeah, and it kind of also maybe going back to psychology, it kind of hits a chord, a familiarity with with the kids' mind. So
Yep.
actually, just to and just again to be mindful of the time, but this isn't a once in a lifetime opportunity to ask from you. With Doc,
Sure, no problem.
thank you, and again, this is awesome to have you on. So Alton, with specifically with Dog Terror, he seemed, in the cartoon, of course, which is kind of like a different story than the toy line. He's depicted before, he's turned into a cyborg and he looks younger, but this specific toy, makes him look like I don't know, he's in his 50s, 60s, something. And Hacker also looks like someone in their, I guess, 40s. Was there any when you designed the toys? Did age play a part in, or how did you designate the age for? Or why did you make Doctor so old, for example?
I don't know. I think it's more like pro wrestling where they're just the goon guys, and the goon guys in wrestling even tend to look a little older
Wow.
when you think about it. But here's a fun fact though. Like I worked on Street Sharks at Kenner, and the main antagonist was Dr. Paranoid, and he's basically a caricature of Doc Terror.
Oh, really?
Oh wow! Now I have to Google it.
Yeah, I had Dr. Terror in mind when I designed Dr.
But
Paranoid.
yeah, it's exact. Like I'm looking at it, and yeah,
Yeah, the original neon green one. That's Dr. Paranoid with the hook hand.
So, Alton, one final question before we move on to some listener questions and quickly, just like a quick fire thing. As fans, we have thought multiple times about a reboot. Do you know who owns the rights and whether, now that the Hasbro inherited the Kenner rights, what's your best guess? Does any single company own the rights, or is it split up between the Ruby Spears, inheritors and the Kenner inheritors separately?
It may be split up a lot, the same way when Hot Wheels brought back the 60s Batmobile and diecast in plastic form, we had to lawyer up everyone because it was just so fragmented, the ownership of that between George Barris and Paramount and DC Comics and everything. So sometimes the only way you can make a reboot happen, unfortunately, is that you've got to do all that lawyering up before you even get into anything creative.
Interesting.
Yeah. And also, okay, of course, neither Kenner nor Ruby Spears exists anymore. Kenner has been absorbed by Hasbro. Ruby Spears has been absorbed by Warner Brothers. And also, there is a rumor among fans, I don't know how true this is, that some person or company that owns part of the rights does not want to see a reboot of Centurions for unknown reasons.
Yeah, it's a question of how much equity they think is in the Centurions brand and the look and the name versus doing something that's similar to it.
Oh, so when a company looks at it, like let's say Hasbro looks at it and says, okay, we either is there enough money in this, and if there is, they'll contact the other, the lawyers of the other party. If not, they're just like, let's either not do it or just rip off the concept because it's not worth it.
Right, and also like something like He-Man, when you bring that back, you're constantly struggling between being faithful to the original material and then trying to update it, and sometimes you never please
Yeah,
anyone.
and we look at He-Man as like the example, of a toy line that was brought back successfully, and so we were talking about this with Mark, and it might pave the way, but I don't know what do you think are the odds of the Centurions coming back?
Well, it depends on how much generational equity you have. Where He-Man had a lot of generational equity, where you not your dad, you want your son to play with it or your daughter to play with the line.
Huh.
So if there's, I don't know if there's any Centurions fans that were kids, but now they're parents that are going to run with that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the reason to bring back.
There's at least a few. I mean, I've seen a video of some guy on YouTube letting his kids play with the Centurions figures, but I don't know how many people there are like that.
Same thing with Micronauts. They've always been talking about a movie, a reboot of a toy line, but it stops and starts.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of brands out there that are in that limbo where there's just enough people that are passionate about it, but then there's people that are controlling the budgets and stuff who don't have any stake in it.
Yeah, and I totally understand where you're coming from with that. But if we look at, like, let's say, there are party manufacturers, and we know both the good guys. I'm sure if you're familiar with them, and the bad guys. In terms of, like, the good guys are the ones who license IPs, and the bad guys are the ones, like, for example, let me just refer to Transformers again, where they just, like, take a character, rename it, create a brand new engineering to it, and, like, a brand new toy, and they don't call it Optimus Prime, they call it, I don't know, big boss car, or big boss truck, or whatever. And they, like, these third party manufacturers basically don't sell, don't give any money to Hasbro. They just release the toy, and apparently Hasbro's lawyers cannot do anything about it. Do you see any options of either good guy or bad guy third party manufacturer path to bring the Centurion toys back in some way?
Well, you bring up an interesting idea, because we're seeing a lot of collector business through the internet where parody is allowed. So you see a lot of He-Man parodies where even wrestlers are sculpted in that He-Man style. So doing, for example, something on the grassroots level like Centurions as a tribute or a parody, if it gets successful on the internet by collectors and enough people notice it and it breaks out, it certainly has people thinking about a reboot a lot more seriously.
So that's the way to bring back Centurions. Get Weird Al Yankovic involved.
Oh.
Or get some of these independent toy makers out there, and there's a lot of them, and do a kind of a parody line. Like, what's a good example? Like a Buzz Lightyear, for example, as a Centurion.
Or what about if someone created a new line that used the same idea of the figures combined with the vehicles, but it was all new characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And an all new storyline, and it didn't use the same name.
I think the problem there is, and I'm curious what you think, Alton, is that if it's a different mechanism, if it's not compatible with the original Centurions, and if the storyline is something completely different, then it's a hard sell to to original fans or new fans, because it's not Centurions, it doesn't look like that, the characters are different storyline. I think it would be a hard sell if it would be completely devoid of the Centurions concept.
Yes. Yes, and there's so many patents on the Centurions line for mechanisms, and when we did all the connecting points, they're all patented. They're all unique, proprietary. So you have to get through that hurdle. It may not be worth it.
Uh-huh. And do you think Hasbro would come after someone if someone maybe recast, like got some prototypes, took them apart and cast them, and then would sell the recast figures? Do you think Hasbro would go after them with lawyers?
They have to do that all the time and protect themselves. But I'd rather see them do like stormtroopers with exo frames.
Now that would be an interesting idea, although
and do it later with an exo frame and say it's an homage to Centurions and bring it back that way.
Oh, so you say an homage is way more probable than
or a mashup, like a mashup of Star Wars and Centurions would be pretty cool, or even G.I. Joe, combining two of your own properties, and what do you have to lose?
Right, sure.
Sell it on your collector direct to market.
Right. It's interesting because the reason why we kind of build hope is because there was this set of maybe a year or two ago that since Hasbro is relaunching some of these IPs featured multiple figures from different worlds. It featured one figure from Transformers. It's like a box set. One figure from Visionaries. One like a Matt Tracker from Mask. A new G.I. Joe figure, two ROM figures, and a G.I. Joe scale Action Man, and some Micronauts figures as well. I don't know if you remember that set, but it's like a multiple franchises that they later combined in like a crossover comic book. So that's why if Mask is apparently at least for one figure is brought back and Visionaries is coming back, why do you think Centurions would be more difficult to bring it back, or would be a different case?
I don't know. For all I know, they may be working on it right now.
Oh,
I'm sure there's at least some B sheets in there.
That would be great.
Yeah. Mr. Potato Head, Centurion.
oh my.
Why?
Mr. Potato Head is the original Centurion.
You're right. It is kind of the same concept. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. But of course, with Centurions, we have that split right situation we have talked about. Yeah. By the way, Alton, there's a question I wanted to ask you about specifically about the connectors in Centurions. Now I used to have the Karate Larvo Jones figure from Police Academy, and he had this thing called a kicker pack where it used the same pay connectors as Centurions had, and I'm just wondering how often you and other Kenner designers drew on Centurions when creating other toys.
Well, you've got all the parts laying around, so sometimes it's easier to prototype something with existing stuff, especially if it's from your own company.
Wow, that's funny.
That's why mask figures were used for Sky Commanders to prototype.
Wow. So basically that's the story of Sky Commanders. That that first you used those figures with those weapon systems, and then you created the figures.
Yeah, we're using them for a lot of stuff. We had plenty around.
I'm sure that Shadow Strikers was part of that too, because it was in the same genre of tiny figures with gimmicky vehicles.
Yeah, I worked on that.
Wow.
Yeah, that was another cool Kenner line that deserved to do better.
It went direct to video, I think. Is it Ruby Spears?
No, Deke made one episode that was released only on home video, and that was it as far as I know.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we're trying to play off the whole stealth thing. Remember, that was cool, the speculation of what that stealth plane was going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
So we got this idea to do all these vehicles that were see-through.
Wow. Yeah, and that kind of makes it look different, but then again, the question is how much interest there is from the kids, and in the 80s the market was full of action figures, especially with G.I. Joe. So I understand it was a tough market, and Kenner was there, Hasbro was there, and Mattel also created toys. So of course there was a lot of competition. And again, just to move on and focusing now on other people's questions. Just quickly, a few that when we announced you as a mystery guest, a lot of people started asking questions, because we were like, hey, what would you like to know? And so here are a few questions from our listeners. So I'm just looking at them and picking the ones that we haven't covered yet. We actually touch on a lot of these. What Levi says that half the reason he collects the toys are the beautiful box art / illustrations. Do you know who did them?
I wish I did, because it's some of the best box art that Kenner did at that time. I'm actually looking at them right now.
Well, actually, Alton, I can tell you because I used to own some of it. It was done by an artist or group of artists working for a Chicago-based company called Richard Aronson Design Associates, which I imagine is why Doc Terror's box shows him attacking the John Hancock Center.
Yeah,
And anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, he
I just
is.
wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that box art question. Now, all the Kenner toys that used box art as opposed to photos like Star Wars, I mean, they had very distinctive styles. Like the Centurions art looked different than the Ghostbusters art, which looked different than the Mask art, which looked different than the Chuck Norris Karate Commandos art. So I assume those are all different studios. And how did the Kenner people choose which studio would be hired to illustrate which toy line? And did the toy designers have any interaction with those artists?
Probably not as much as they do today. I think that was handled by a different department, so I never had much say in the artwork. Like I remember Karate Commandos, it was that whole different, like very loose, sketchy style,
Yes.
which I thought was kind of refreshing. Right? It was very cool. But I go, I don't know who did it, but it's different. And Ghostbusters is kind of rendered like half the guys that do board games and serial art. It has that kind of bubbly, hyper-colored, cutesy semi 3D look, which is perfect for tone and matter.
Yeah, heavily
Yep.
airbrushed, sort of cartoony looking to go with the look of the cartoon itself.
Yeah, but cartoon like, but hyped up a bit,
Right.
Yes.
like board game art.
Yeah, and then of course the mask art was what was more realistic, but not as photorealistic as the painted Centurions art.
Yeah, I think we would have done it in CG now, or rendered CG
Yeah, definitely. Or even take from
for
the
vehicles.
accompanying cartoon because they still that's one of the means of selling or video game. Uh, you know. So yeah. Sorry. Moving on with the questions. Albert asks, and you partially, I think, mentioned, but just to repeat the question, at what state did Ruby Spears, or Ruby and Spears, the gentlemen who are actually rumored to have personally contributed, not just their company, but Ruby and Spears have contributed to the design of the characters? Do you know of their involvement? Did you actually have any? Interaction with the cartoon producers, or did you get any design input or any changes that they maybe requested or offered, or it was just you and no interaction with Ruby Spears?
Personally, at my level at that time, none. But then going to Ghostbusters, I worked very heavily with the animators and writers,
Huh.
and we'd have
Huh.
brainstorm sessions and stuff. So it all depends on the line. But me personally didn't have much interaction on Centurions.
Gotcha. Interesting. And yeah, it again proves the point that this is a fascinating line because it's not IP, it's original design. Anson asks, could you elaborate on the manufacturing process of the figures?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it was done offshore. That's why we don't have prototypes in the office. Maybe it was a different vendor then that was that required more engineering than our usual action figures. But it was in engineering development for a long time because it's really an engineering-driven system.
Huh, that's interesting. The little boy inside me wants to ask. So basically, that means that somewhere maybe in China, there were or there might be some molds of the prototypes or the more elaborately engineered pieces.
Possibly.
And not just China.
I guess if you talk to some toy veterans, like engineering toy veterans back then, they might know who did them.
Yeah, and not just China. I remember that some Centurions toys said made in Mexico or made in Macau or someplace like that.
Yes.
Actually, Alton, or are you aware of the bootleg figures that are original molds, supposedly of Crystal Kane, Lucy, and some of the characters, which again look bootleggy, but they're original molds?
Really? No, not too aware of those.
Yeah, it's they did. I'm not sure if they had any weapons but Mark, do you remember those figures?
Well, I haven't personally seen one. I've seen photos of them on the net. I know that the Crystal Cane one was part of a Chinese bootleg toy line for Centurions because that's how much anticipation there was that this property was going to be the big hit that it deserved to be. That's why there are so many Centurions, comic books and stick-on sets and bed sheets and things like that.
Watches.
Yeah, watches even. Yeah,
Lunch boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They really, whoever was in charge of our out licensing was doing a great job.
Yeah, it's really cool that even if the toys are limited, so we cannot really splurge on unless we spend like hundreds of dollars on a new figure. There are these pieces of merchandise, even some are obscure. Like there was a little kiddie pinball machine. I don't know if you remember that, or some of like these lunch boxes and stuff that people would still collect, and they're pretty fascinating. So we're going to, I think, definitely upload a gallery of these of these bootleg figures just to show you to the Facebook group, because they're quite interesting to see. Yeah, some people asked about the prototypes. You already mentioned that you mainly have the main line, and you don't really have prototypes. Do you have any drawings or designs or B sheets of in your collection?
Of I think you guys have everything,
Are you the ones you sent over to Mark, for example?
and I think, but yeah, I think at one time I sent a lot of stuff over to Mark. I'll look and see if there's any other stuff.
Thank you. That would be awesome.
Yeah, and once again, Alton, thank you for sending that stuff, and thank you for being so great to Centurion fans.
Absolutely, you're fantastic. You're the dream first guest to the show.
Well, thank you. Well, getting back to like that why there's so many licensed things too, is because it's more true back then, but the regional markets were a lot more aggressive and had more of a say. So Mexico or UK would want the pinball machines. They would say we need school supplies, and I think they drove a lot of that. And I think that was a lot of the strength of Centurions, is that there was a lot of good regional support that made it big.
Oh, that's interesting. Actually, was any of your design work not influenced, but did they send you any guidelines? For example, for this market, this works well, so please incorporate this beyond, the big launchers. Was there any guideline from a marketing perspective that you were given?
Not me, but I'm sure they existed. Some style guide.
Mm-mm-mm.
Oh, that would be wonderful to see that if anyone has it.
Yeah. This is a treasure hunt.
Yeah, you guys gotta keep digging.
Alton, listener John Paul just wanted to thank you for the amazing work that you did, and you inspired actually him to create some DIY Centurions weapon systems that are actually look really amazing. And he hadn't done anything like this before, but just your work, and the other designers' work inspired him to create his own, DIY weapon systems.
That's great.
So
I'm very honored.
So it's really awesome.
Thank you.
So Jeff, I think we already answered this question. Were there more waves planned, including more villains? You mentioned that there were no villains planned, and that new waves will after the semi cancellation of Wave 2 or the limited release of Wave. There were like do you know of anything beyond that, or you already moved on to other projects?
Well, I think just philosophically for me, between Head Splitter and Half Mad and the Doom drones, that if we would have done more Doom drone type of stuff and accessory packs and just armed them up, because the permutations were tremendous. What you can do with those guys without having to add another character.
That's really cool.
Oh, and Alton, Alton, that reminds me. Now, did you work on the Cyber Wars?
No.
Oh, well, that answers that.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as I remember, Alton mentioned early on that his focus was mainly on the first season toys, and I think you mentioned that you moved on to the IP toy lines mostly with Ghostbusters and the other projects.
Yeah, the big master toy licenses.
Was that actually a promotion of sorts, or what were these different lines, both the licensed and the originals, were they on the same level, or was that some kind of a hierarchy or pecking order of like, oh, you did a good job, now you're going to be assigned to this project?
That was the Ghostbusters was the first line that I got to pretty much run. So that's my first chance of being the main designer on that.
Oh,
And I gotta say, you did a great job on that because those, that whole line was really cool.
yeah.
Thank you for a line based on a movie that was already 4 years old, but the animation really made it successful. So just bringing back Ghostbusters, you can do a cool movie and have Ivan Reitman's son direct it, but people forget how good the cartoon was. And if you don't have that going,
There are a lot of fans who have not forgotten. It was
the cartoon really extended the story.
yeah, real Ghostbusters. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Real Ghostbusters was one of the best written cartoons of its time. And by the way, a lot of the Real Ghostbusters writers also wrote for Centurions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh, that's
Yeah. They were really good. Those are some dark stories in there.
yeah.
Sam Hain and, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari kind of stuff. That was pretty heavy stuff for Saturday morning.
Were you actually a cartoon fan? So were you able to appreciate, both either Centurions or Ghostbusters or the lines which were connected to cartoons? Did you appreciate the cartoons, or was that like, that's pretty cool, but not really my cup of tea thing?
I grew up on Saturday morning cartoons, so I think that's why the 80s were great eras that you had that.
Do you think like from a toy designer perspective, what really is different from today's era compared to that era? I assume like just one thing that I could throw out there is like the video games, that even small kids play as opposed to like toys. But from a toy designer perspective, what are the stark differences between like the 80s and the 80s toy lines and nowadays?
Well, they're younger people playing with them, right? Even Hot Wheels is like a 4-year-old, whereas in my day, you were 9 years old playing with Hot Wheels. And that's unthinkable now. So that alone, but then you have all this entertainment on demand. The kids can watch whatever they want, whenever they want, and you don't have to wait till Saturday morning. It's a lot more competitive, a lot more stuff to look at.
So basically, it's just times moved on from like, and when we entered this computerized era, people just like basically kids and their interest in toys just like went down in age, so that younger people buy or are the targets of toys and toy manufacturers, and the olders are lost to computer games and consoles.
Yeah, also the drive, like on Nickelodeon or some Cartoon Network, is the drive is not to sell toys. So a lot of the stuff like is.
Although it wasn't always that way, with the new Thundercats. Okay, well, first with Symbiotic Titan, that got canceled despite its getting ratings because they couldn't get a toy line, and Thundercats, the revival, also got ratings, but it got canceled because the toys didn't sell. So, yeah, there was a time when Cartoon Network cared a lot about merchandise.
Yeah, and Nickelodeon too.
Yeah. Speaking of collectors nowadays, there's I don't know whether that's fiscally true, or whether we just see our subculture bigger because we're in it, but the adult collector subculture is vastly bigger than back then. I'm sure that's true for Hot Wheels too, or for other toy lines that you worked on. That there's a way bigger mature audience out there who just buy it and display it on their shelves.
Yeah, collector market is a big difference.
If I could interject, I worked at a Target store, in the toy department throughout most of 1996. And whenever I worked mornings, I remember there would always be the collector guys there at 8 o'clock when you opened, wanting to get the rare Hot Wheels toys before anyone else could buy them.
Yes.
And now that category evolved into what we call scalpers, who buy the limited releases and then sell them on eBay for triple the price.
For your Comic-Con exclusive.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just a few, maybe 2 or 3 more questions left. Simeon asks, again, we partially touched on this. Can you name other people you worked with on the line, and specifically those that still can be reached?
For Centurions, of course, Mark Boudreau. And he's retired now, so he might be easier to get to.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Alton, I personally would love to talk to Mark Boudreau. Although I understand he's had some interactions with Star Wars fans that have been kind of, let's say, interesting. So, I mean, if you could tell him that Centurions fans don't bite, who knows? Maybe he could be on this podcast someday.
Yes, and he and I both go to the unboxing, the Mexico show. That's probably a good place to grab them too. Yes, when I went there, had so many Hot Wheels fans and fans of my designs. It was incredible. When they knew I was coming there, they had boxes of stuff for me to sign. Very, very passionate, very great fans.
Well, of course, you're a Hall of Famer. You're not just any toy designer,
Oh.
So Terrence asks, how did the design team come up with the pegging mechanic? And the second part we kind of answered. What were the inspirations behind the various systems you designed? What guidelines did you receive? That's his question.
I think it's mostly our own inspiration. I think we could see a lot of state-of-the-art military inspiration, and even the nomenclature, like Wild Weasel, all those kind of things, where it's stuff like right out of military magazines. Top Gun.
And the pegging mechanic was that the foundation basically of the concept, or that was just the execution?
Oh, you mean the system?
Yeah. So basically, what did that come first, or that was just later down the line when you're like, okay, now we have to execute this concept that we came up of, or you already had a good concept of like, let's do a toy line that includes this pegging mechanism, and the fleshing out came later?
I think it just came about as pretty early on that if we're going to have a figure that it becomes a weapon system, that you're going to have some kind of system to attach everything. But I don't think that we had a brief to say create a 7-inch tall with a figure with a bunch of holes in it.
Okay, yeah, maybe that was a naive question. We answered those two, just taking them out. And Cal, one of our other listeners, I'm just looking. I'm sorry. I'm kind of lost in the question because I think we partially touched on the licensing issues and how valid or how possible it is to actually bring back the line. But just to kind of pick the part of his question that I know he means, because he wanted to bring back maybe in the form of a statue or an homage the toy line as a fan initiative. Do you like your personal opinion? Do you think as a Kickstarter project, or as a third party project, like a parody, that could survive without Hasbro stepping in, based on your experience with Mattel and Kenner, or do you think that's something we shouldn't even bother with because we're two small fishes and they're just gonna get us torn apart by lawyers?
Oh no, I think the whole industry is looking to see what comes out of DesignerCon from the grassroots and from real fans and from real people. And so that's where a lot of that stuff started from. Somebody just does a mashup and does a beautiful job and gets noticed. And then when they see the people that see actually the following of it, and the industry takes notice of that. So if somebody wants to take it on their own, do their own line of Centurions or Centurions inspired stuff, or do their own mashups, like Star Wars Centurions,
Oh,
and have it on display or even in art form, I think could see pretty quickly if people react to it.
interesting. But what we do should either be these homages or unique designs, because taking using the original toys as molds is you said it's like a patent thing, so that should it's nice to come up with it, but not in the form of copying existing toys, right?
Right. I'd also like to see somebody do a fully weathered, highly scratch built detail version of the Centurion,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
like they, like they do with Nerf guns. And so super detail and kit bash and hobby grade Centurions, and have them dioramas or on display or as a pseudo toy or a pseudo collector would be pretty cool for me to see.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and that's actually an idea we haven't thought of. One funny detail. Again, I'm just based on my well, I still for me Centurions is number one, but Transformers is kind of number two. They released a special Target exclusive of of these Transformers jet robots, the Seekers, and they actually match up in color with the Centurions. So there's one yellowish, orangish one blue, and one green. And I'm like, there has to be someone there who basically thought of the Centurions, because it's such a dead ringer, at least to me, that the colors match and it's a trio that's sold in a so maybe there are some people out there at Mattel or Hasbro who are wanting to also work on the project again.
Well, somebody drew the original Darth Tater, right? And that became something. So it might have just started as a joke in somebody's cubicle, but then I think enough people said, "That's really cool. We should do it."
That's a valid point. Yeah, Darth Tater. Yeah. Although I'm so biased towards Jake that I would be I don't know how I would take a Tate or a Tater Rockwell figure. So
Then remember, he is the original Centurion.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now I'm trying to think of food. Now I'm trying to think of food puns for the other guys'
that's a slippery
names.
slope, please. That Mark, that's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another show.
Hack Tater. No. But Alton, thank you so much for your time. Just a question to you, Mark. Do you have any other questions before we say our goodbyes to this great man and our listeners?
Two really quick ones. First, now before Centurions, around 1984 or so, there was this line from Remco called Mantech. It was a similar concept. These 7-inch figures that had interchangeable high-tech parts, but in my opinion, not nearly as good. Now, was anyone at Kenner aware of that line, and could that have been one of the inspirations for Centurions?
Yeah, we were aware of them. I think we had some of the product. Yeah, I think it had a direct influence, or something to stay away from. Yeah, those big suits and guys with tiny heads. Remember that? It's like a big suit, and the guy had a tiny head. human head in it.
Now, Alton, were there actually toy lines that were figuratively or literally on your shelves designing the Centurions, where you either, like you said, were like, okay, let's this is cool, let's take some inspiration from this, or no, stay away from this specific gimmick or toy line?
Well, not one particular toy, but I think even Legos has inspiration for Centurions. Like we're trying to go out of our way not to make them look like Lego figures, because that was some of the concern. Is like, right, these guys are going to look okay having all these holes, and so this way you had to very carefully do the proportions and all the interfaces, and just so it didn't look like they were bricks.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, by the way, Alton, there have been fans who've done their own Lego style Centurions figures. So these parodies and tributes you've been talking about, some of them already exist.
Yeah, yeah. But I think I saw those and they're very cute. But I think when you really get a lot of eyeballs is when you cross over into other properties.
Yeah, that actually makes sense, because then you could tap into two fan bases instead of just the original one.
That's why the He-Man archetype works so well with a lot of heroes in a funny way.
Well, I hope that some of those eyeballs belong to some executive who might say, we own Centurions, let's bring it back. Okay, and Alton, I have one last question for you, which, we've been talking about the past all this time. Let's talk about the present. I mean, we've mentioned that you're at Mattel. We've mentioned you're one of the so to speak, big wheels at Hot Wheels. What other toy lines have you worked on for them?
Oh, let's see now. Actually, I'm no longer directly on Hot Wheels. I'm in a group that works with all the other teams throughout the company. So we facilitate a lot of innovation and technology for all the other teams. And we're a highly seasoned group because considering that most of the company has been there less than 5 years. So we're pushing a lot of the, just toy knowledge.
Is there something that, looking back at the 80s, not necessarily Centurions or that era, but maybe even the Centurions design process, since you were so instrumental, are there any types of activities or experiences that you miss or that you're nostalgic about, that now that you're more senior or the toy industry has changed, you don't have the opportunity to practice anymore?
What's interesting is I look a lot at the Centurions and Ghostbuster sheets and models, and a lot of the technique transferred over to digital pretty well. So I feel like I'm doing the same design work, but I'm just using a different medium. So I'm not using markers anymore. But I think
cool.
But as far as what else am I nostalgic for? I think we used to do a lot more stuff in house.
And now it's outsourced.
And working with a lot of it's outsourced.
That's interesting.
So I think you had more control at that in those days because you're working with somebody across the hall.
So one of the things that you miss is basically the hands-on, more creative control of the 80s.
Yes, and also at Kenner, we had like a semi-weekly presentation of ideas. So that was our job, is to go up and present to the rest of the company these new ideas. And that was fun. That was great training. Also, we used to handle a lot of inventor ideas. So professional inventing houses submit toy ideas to us. So it was better for us as a design team to present them. So even if those came in from the outside, like they'll give me a car, for example, because I was into cars, and I'll demonstrate this car that does something, right? And I'll pitch it as best as I can. And in some ways, you can do it because you're a little bit, what do you call it? You don't have a stake in it as much, so you can have fun with it, and you're not worrying about criticism. So that was some of the stuff I missed from those Kenner days. We used to do that all the time.
Did it feel to you like it was a Wild West type free environment where you could, kind of, be creative and impulsively
Yes,
creative?
it wasn't very PC then. No, there was yelling. People used to yell and pound tables because they were felt so strongly about a feature or the philosophy of the line. It was people really were that way. You don't see that as much anymore.
Because it's just not the culture. Company culture is not that like that anymore.
Yeah, that's how it was then.
I have to ask this, and I'm sorry, but since you're here now, I think I also speak for Mark. Out of curiosity, honestly, I'm a white dude, so, and looking at the cast, I could identify with all of them because they kind of, if I grow a mustache, I look like Max, generic white guy. If I look at Jake, I basically look kind of like Jake Midway with a smaller jawline. I could dye my hair and become Ace. Was there a reason why the main cast was exclusively white guys essentially, and even the two extra characters, one was a white guy and the other one was Native American? What like in the age of when even G.I. Joe had some prominent African Americans and other characters?
Well, even when we did Max Steel, and from a lot of research going through all Europe, when the property comes from the U.S., they expect it to be an American, and oftentimes it ended up being a Caucasian American. Right? So even with Max Steel, we went and used a young Harrison Ford as the archetype. We didn't want him to look like a model type. We wanted to be a real guy that's approachable. And so that was the directive, is he's kind of a young Harrison Ford, with kind of imperfect nose and things like that. So, I mean, we, again, and we show that in Mexico and Latin America, and they loved him. They said, "Oh, he looks great. Should we change him?" He goes, "No, he looks great that way." So a lot of times, even your regional fans don't want it to be that way.
So they expect like an American toy. They expect it to be like look American and by American, like look like a young American guy, like a white dude or something.
Yeah. Well, now we're so multicultural now. So today you're doing a multicultural team, and you're trying to, disperse the diversity of talents and not go to fall on stereotypes. So this one person can't always be the ninja. This person can't always be the hacker, and right, this person is not the rock star. So sometimes you have to go against stereotypes. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally would say, and I actually got in trouble on the Centurions group with one member for suggesting this, that if it's ever rebooted, I would like to see it be more like Mask, where you have Centurions of various ethnicities from all over the world. I think that would be really great, and maybe have some female Centurions as well.
Yeah, if you look at that movie, Edge of Tomorrow, she's basically a female Centurion.
Yeah, that Tom Cruise thing where he keeps getting killed and brought back. Yeah, I gotta check. I gotta check that movie out.
Yeah, but his leader is a woman, and she's an exoframe with weapons, and she's basically trained them.
Alton, do you think that with maybe this was more topical a few years ago when the Iron Man series of movies came out, because I think it's beyond a shadow of doubt that the most successful in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all of comic book movies probably was the Downey Jr. Impersonation of Tony Stark, and the Iron Man movies. At least that's my perspective. Do you think like the Centurions could by virtue of association could profit from that, or that could give it a boost, or that's gone, and Centurions has to stand on its own.
I think as long as, like in the Avengers, they have a clear-cut personalities and not just the suits. So if you put these guys in a room like they do in the Avengers and they're having drinks and they're all in character, then you know you've created some good characters.
Huh, interesting.
Because you go, that's totally how Captain America would act. Because of course Tony Stark is doing this, so it's not just a guy in a suit anymore.
But the original
So
Centurions were also kind of, or do you think they were too stereotypical?
Well, I think we went to clear-cut differentiations of the guy, and Lancey and Air, and they're sort of the poster boys for that.
What was there actually a difference between how you characterized them and how they were presented in the cartoon?
I think they got genericized a bit.
So are there any aspects that you planned, for example, for the characters, or that were planned, and personally traits or any characterization that was generalized?
No, not too much, because that wasn't our job. But I mean, at least they didn't make Jake Rockwell the practical joker of the team, right? He's always smirking, and then Ace is always the one who's serious. At least they didn't do that.
Yeah, although it's funny that sorry, Mark. Just one thought to tell Alton is, in the cartoon, I remember specifically this scene where Ace, that they introduced the season 2 Centurions, Rex and John. And they're walking on the street, and this is a kids show though, and they see like this nice woman, and they both turn around to kind of stare at the woman as she walks by, and then they realize that each of them are like, both of them are looking at the woman, and then they look at each other, and they kind of exchange this look and kind of remark that, I think we're gonna get along because we have the same interests or something. There's kind of that flavor, but yeah.
That's kind of cringy.
Yeah. Especially nowadays, I think Mark would say that it's not appropriate nowadays.
Well, I gotta say that today, a lot of Ace's "Hey, pretty lady" shtick would not fly, so to speak. But anyway, and also I remember another thing Michael Reeves told me, that between him and his writing partner, Steve Perry, and some of the other Centurions writers, they had shorthand for each of the characters. At least the first three. Max was the smart guy, Ace was the playboy, and Jake was the thug.
The thug.
Oh. Maybe internally,
Wow.
Well, I guess I don't blame them. They have to come up with some kind of fence or guardrails for those characters, or else to get too generic. Even if it doesn't manifest itself in the animation, you got to start from somewhere.
Right. And Alton, you as basically the father of these, or of some of these concepts, or many of these concepts involving the show, would you be more proud or happy personally to, if a reboot ever happens, both in cartoon and in toy form, to have a reboot of the original cast, or maybe how they did it with Mask, where they took the main character and made it African American, or retire the main three guys, Max, Ace, and Jake, and bring in like completely newly created characters as like the current Centurions?
Yeah, it depends on the audience, but I think the guys are kind of old for today's market. I think like Max, more like Max Steel's age now, whereas Max Steel started out in his early 30s, 20s, 30s, and now he's a teenager.
Oh, so and Max is like, Max feels like he's in his maybe early 40s, at least,
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you want. Well, it depends, like if you want a Spider-Man kind of guy, like one of the guys is younger and he's a little more brash and not as experienced. I mean, it depends on with a team you can do that.
Yeah, on the Facebook group recently, somebody found this beautiful anime-inspired picture of the Centurions, and the way Jake was drawn, he looked like in his 20s or something, and one of the fans said, "No, don't do that. The Centurions are men." So, but on the other hand, this guy is an old school fan, so I mean, maybe today's audience would respond better to younger Centurions. Who knows?
I think they need a mix.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
My take to it personally is to like just have the three main guys retire and have a new generation of completely new characters, because then the people like me who appreciate the original concept and don't want that butchered like by writers or directors, we can have our piece and see like, oh, there's old Max now being like a a retired person or a naval captain or something, and okay, the new characters can do whatever they want. It might work out well, it might not, but at least the ones that were created in 84, 85, 86, they are intact and they exist still in the universe.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And no matter what you do for a reboot or even just thinking about it, like you can't make, since these guys are exoframes, even then we had criticism like you can't make them look handicapped or disabled, right? It can't look like crutches or something. It has to be empowering. So think about that as like whoever the character is or however you design it now, it's got to be integrated to be empowering, not like he's trapped in it. And even Iron Man is sort of trapped.
Yeah, absolutely. Terror and Hacker are the ones who are trapped.
Yeah. Yes. And that's why they're angry.
Yeah. And to put it in a different way, they're half mad.
Yeah.
So
Doc Tater.
Alton, one thing, and again, we're kind of running out of time, and your time, just to be respectful, because it's getting probably dinner time over there. If someone listens to this, and whether they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or 20s, or even teens, and feel like they want to maybe follow in your footsteps as a young toy designer, how would you approach that? Including what tools would you suggest mastering?
Well, as a design teacher as well, I think my best advice is always be curious about everything, how things work, and not be afraid to question why things are the way they are. Because some of the best designers and inventors always looked at something and asked, why is it this way? Why can't it be better? For everything in general, you should be able to question things and say, I can make this better, or why is it that way? And those people that are inquisitive, that are always inquisitive to their lives, make the best creative people to me.
Mm-hmm. Very wise words.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alton. And I just personally wanted to say, I know that Centurions was like around a year of your life that you spent working on it, and here we are going over it obsessively for all this time. And Yuri and I, and I'm sure the rest of the Centurions fan community, appreciate so much your willingness to do this.
Yes, I actually want to especially thank the international fans I've heard from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are quite a few of us out there.
I was going to say, maybe we can get something going here. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you never know.
Thank you so much, Alton.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alton. It's been a pleasure. Mark, anything else on your side?
No, I think this is going to be a great episode, and we might have to cut it into 2 parts like we did with the last one. But yeah, I think that the Centurions fan community is going to learn a lot from this.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And okay. Alton, if there's anything else you bump into and you're like, oh, I need to put something on the fire to warm my house up because or to get the grill ready, and if it's a Centurions bee sheet or something, please don't burn it, and instead at least take a photo of it before to dispose of it.
Oh, sure. Of course.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Power Extreme!